Okay, so we've been talking about intelligence and multiple intelligence, but we need to start off with a definition. What is it? How do we define it? So we've already previously talked about learning styles, and learning styles refer to how we learn, how we process information, but intelligence refers to our ability to solve problems, how we solve problems. It's actually not only our ability to solve problems, but it's also to be creative, to be able to create ideas and products that are of actually value to our culture. Now, there are a lot of different components that make up intelligence, including, the basic knowledge level, application and problem solving, and of course the highest level, which is creative intelligence, coming up with ideas. Now, when I think of intelligence, I always tend to think of this funny cartoon, and you can see it on there. There's a guy on his computer, right? And he says, it's a memo, and it says, it's come to my attention that every time we solve one problem, we create two more. So from now on, all problem solving is forbidden. So what does this mean? What does the cartoon translate to, at least with respect to college, this place where theoretically we are getting more and more intelligent, right? Well, the more we think, the more we use our brain, the more we use our intelligence, we realize that there are actually more questions than there are answers, and we go about solving those. So in other words, when I tend to think of or look at college as actually a process of knowing less and less about more and more. And at the same time, we do actually become better and better at solving any new problem that comes out. We are able to figure out and solve problems about, the less and less that we realize that we actually don't know. Okay, so we know what intelligence is. It's this ability to solve problems. It's the ability to create products and ideas that are of value to a culture. But how do we measure it? And for a long time, researchers actually conceptualized intelligence in sort of one singular way. Okay, one way alone. And we call it IQ. And IQ stands for intelligence quotient. We still use IQ tests today. We still talk about IQ. You can still get a score on an IQ test indicating your intelligence. But I want you to keep in mind that when you take an intelligence test, a number actually comes back. And it basically indicates these different levels. And you can look at the levels. It's, super smart, genius, kind of normal or average, and the terms that refer to not so smart. So when people or parents or schools get these numbers back, it really pigeonholes people into who or what they're capable of. But in 1983, there was this Harvard professor, this Harvard researcher, you could say a really smart guy, named Howard Gardner, and he actually critiqued the use of that IQ score, the intelligence quotient score, to reveal all the complexities of intelligence. And his argument was that how can one score, one test, reveal all of these complexities that go into making up intelligence? And he stated that having that IQ represent intelligence is actually misleading because it lends us to think that there is only one type of intelligence, which is inaccurate. So instead of identifying just one intelligence, Gardner actually identified 8 different types of intelligence. And the idea here is that every single human being, has 8 different abilities to pick from when solving problems or coming up with new ideas or new products or new solutions. And all of us possess all of the 8 different abilities. It just happens that most of us have been trained to use only 2 or 3. So you can think of it as the nature-nurture. We're all inborn with nature, certain genetic dispositions that lend ourselves to be, good at one thing or another. But then we also nurture skill sets. So it's the combination of those two. So if you've ever done things that have, come easily for you, you're probably drawing on one of your intelligence that is well developed, again, because of some combination of nature and nurture. But if you have tried to do things that are really difficult to master or understand, you're probably dealing with some kind of material or skills or knowledge that's tapping into one of your less developed intelligences. But just take a step back and think about it. What if you actually were tapping into all of your 8 abilities? Think of your capabilities. You're a super superpower, right? What you can do with this. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to walk through each of the 8 different types of intelligence that Howard Gardner discussed. Now, by now, you guys know I really like quotes, and one of the best quotes that summarizes this concept of multiple intelligence is there on the screen. And it reads, "Everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid," by Albert Einstein. So that pretty much summarizes what we're talking about here with these different skill sets, these different abilities. Okay, let's look at our first type of intelligence. It is specifically called a verbal linguistic intelligence. And you can say that these people are word smart. You can say it's language smart. So obviously they communicate well through language. So they like to read, spell, write, speak. They're good at, telling stories or jokes. And you can think of all sorts of professions where having a verbal linguistic intelligence makes sense. So things like writers and speakers, teachers and lawyers. I have there on the screen an excellent example, J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series. You can think of William Shakespeare and so forth. So yes, in our society and many societies, having verbal linguistic intelligence is very important. And that's one of the reasons that if you just focus on public schools in the United States, K through 12, you will always have language arts. You always have, for example, in the United States, an English class or a Spanish class or so forth. The second type of intelligence is called a logical mathematical intelligence, and people who are good at this are good at those 2 areas. You see it there on the screen, number smart, but it's not just about numbers. Numbers and math it's about a lot of logic, rational thinking. So you can think of it as logic smart, math smart, number smart. They tend to use logic, order, rational thinking. There's a lot of the ability to conceptualize and reason, the ability to think in abstract concepts, not things that you can actually reach out and touch, but think about abstract, like when you think about abstract numbers, imaginary numbers. They're also really good at cause and effect. You can think of the scientific method, hypothesis testing, and of course they enjoy math and science. So obvious professions where people excel would be scientists and mathematicians. I have on the screen Microsoft creator Bill Gates, right? Very logical, mathematical mind. So just like the verbal linguistic intelligence, logical mathematical is really valued in our society. We highly value, you could say math and science, but logic and math. And this is drilled into us again in public schools from kindergarten all the way through college. So we will always have our math classes, our logic math classes. Naturalistic intelligence focuses on being, you could say, nature or environment smart. So these people have an interest in the environment or in nature. They easily recognize elements of nature. They like to classify and group, separate items based on their characteristics. So how are they similar? How are they different? And when you think of our planet, you can think of the different spheres. We have the atmosphere, the gaseous envelope, the hydrosphere, the water, the lithosphere, the solid rocks, and the biosphere where plants and animals reside. So people who are who are really good at naturalistic tend to go into careers like botany, the study of plants, or zoology, the study of animals, or the interface between plants and animals and human beings, like environmentalism. So on the screen, you can see that beautiful kitty cat there with Steve Irwin. Deceased, of course, environmentalist Steve Irwin would be an excellent example. And just like the first 2, verbal linguistic and logical mathematical, we highly value in our society in the United States, we highly value people who are good at naturalistic intelligence, that they are good at particularly the sciences, the natural sciences. And we are trained, kindergarten through high school on into college, we will always have our science courses. Now we've talked about 3 of the types of intelligences, and now the next 3, we tend not to think of these perhaps perceptually as high on the scale as the next 3 as the first 3, but that is inaccurate. These next 3 are as important equally important as the first three. So the next intelligence is called a visual spatial, and it means that you're good at visuals, images, space, two-dimensional, three-dimensional spaces. So you can think of the spatial skills definitely in fields like the arts and also in geography. So art focused on visuals, geography focused on location. And so these people are good with any kind of visual cues like images, pictures. They're also good at things like distance, direction, location. And you can think of, careers, artists, geographers, but it's also navigators, people who are drivers, pilots, architects, for example. The gentleman that you see on the screen is actually Frank Lloyd Wright. I don't know how many of you are familiar with famous architects, but he's one of the world famous architects. That museum there that you see is the Guggenheim Museum in New York City, and he's famous for all sorts of not only business, commercial, architectural feats, but also homes. So while this is an incredibly important intelligence, this one has not been viewed as significant as it should be. And I want you to think about how many, visual spatial classes you've been encouraged to have, for example, in college or even in public schools. And it's not as many when compared to, of course, the English language arts classes, the math classes, and the science classes. But yet again, this is one of the ways in which we solve problems and create products that are of value to society. All right, now we have up next the musical intelligence, and of course it means people who are skilled in this area are good with the elements of music, pitch, beat, rhythm, harmony, and obviously these people are skilled in some kind of musical talent, whether it's singing, humming, whistling, playing some kind of a musical instrument. They are not just musically inclined, though. They actually have this incredible ability to recognize patterns, and they respond instantly to not only music but patterns as reflected in music. So obviously careers, you can think of musicians and dancers and so forth, artists as well. And in the photo, of course, I have Lady Gaga, musician and artist. So similar to the visual spatial, historically not as much significance has been given to this intelligence when we compare it again with the language, with the math, and with the sciences. But again, equally important to enrich our world, to solve problems, and to come up with things that are of value to culture. Next on our list, we have that kind of strange word up there. That is bodily kinesthetic. And that means that these people are body smart. They're movement smart. They have a very strong sense of learning by movement, by action. They tend to move around a lot. They enjoy working with their hands and their fingers and their arms and their feet, their toes. They are graced with some form of athletic ability. So obviously athletes, dancers, actors would all be in this category. And as you see on the screen, the former deceased, obviously, basketball player Kobe Bryant would be an example of this. So again, similar to the music smart and to the visual spatial smart, this intelligence hasn't been viewed as valuable as the first three we talked about, the verbal linguistic, the math, and the science. But again, it is. And I also want to just focus on that word kinesthetic there, the movement of the body. Some of you may be majoring in kinesiology, which is the study of body movement. So definitely another piece of the intelligence puzzle, how we solve problems and how we advance ourselves as humans using knowledge of our movement and of our bodies. All right, now we've got two more types of intelligence, and these are a little bit different from the first six. So we kind of had the language and the math and the science, right? And then we went to kind of the arty ones, the art, the music, and the body. And now we're going to look at these last two. But before we get into them, I do want to talk about prefixes, because in the English language, if you understand prefixes and suffixes, you're going to understand what a lot of words mean that you might initially not know. So the prefixes that we're dealing with in this discussion are INTER and INTRA, which is inter and intra. So let's just go over what that means before we actually talk about the intelligence. So if you have the word INTER, like you see on the screen, INTER, inter, means between. But if you have INTRA, intra, it means within. So let me give you an example we all know about. So if I say I'm going to take an interstate highway, that is a highway that goes between two states, like an interstate highway I-35 that goes between Oklahoma and Texas, right? But an intra-state highway is one that is contained within a state. So, you know, Business 83, that highway only is within the state of Texas. That is an intra-state highway. So now let's look at intelligence. So we have interpersonal intelligence, and that means intelligence between people, just like a between states highway, right? And it means that this person is people smart, that they understand other people, they love to communicate, they possess active engagement skills, they have leadership skills, okay? And so obviously careers for this type would be teachers and politicians and salespeople. I have a photo up of talk show host Jimmy Fallon of The Tonight Show. Again, an excellent example of somebody who is good interacting and communicating with other individuals. And this is a type of intelligence. And lastly, we have the intrapersonal intelligence, and this means that you are self-smart or me-smart. It's within a person. So these kinds of people have a very deep awareness of their own thoughts, their own feelings. They know themselves, they're reflective, they're feeling-oriented, and they do need a little bit of time to process that. When we talk about reflection, they do need alone time to be able to reflect on their experiences relative to the world situation, for example. So intrapersonal intelligence, and I know all of us are probably thinking, well, we all know ourselves better than anyone else, but that's not exactly what this means. It means you're really in tune with how you roll and how you think and how you function. So professions might be, you know, an independent business owner, you might be a writer, a philosopher, somebody who's deeply entrenched in their own values and beliefs and become an activist for some kind of a cause, which is why I have on the screen, you know, Angelina Jolie, an actress, and Malala, which we've talked about before, also an activist. So this would be an example of intrapersonal, and it is a type of being smart and solving problems. Okay, so yes, we have 8 different skill sets that are available to us to solve problems and create products and ideas for our cultures, right? We can use all of them, of course, but we tend to gravitate towards some more than others because of nature and nurture. So it is important, guys, for us to understand, first of all, what are the 8 types in general, you know, so we can understand ourselves and also understand others. For ourselves, the first step is self-identification, which you can do from either just, you know yourself, or from taking something called a multiple intelligence assessment, which obviously you're going to be doing this week. Now, once you have identified your strengths and weaknesses in terms of multiple intelligence, like anything, you can then use your strengths to your advantage while you're working to improve those weaker skill sets. So obviously you're going to be better equipped to tackle challenges if you know these strengths and you know these weaknesses. And if you know your dominant intelligences, specifically your strengths, it's also going to give you that window, that insight into your future life choices, including obviously your career. Now, from the vantage point of the rest of the world, it's important to know whether, to know where other people are coming from. Whether it's your significant other, or if you have children, or a coworker, a classmate, or so on. We have so many different relationships in our life. It's really important that we not only understand ourselves, but that we understand other people. It's part of that interpersonal intelligence we just talked about. So if you understand the multiple intelligence strengths and weaknesses of others, you can also help them leverage their strengths while also helping them work on their weaknesses. So it really is a win-win for everyone when we understand a concept like multiple intelligence.